Patrick's Day. May the luck of the Irish be with you. Hopefully, I'm not offending anyone with that statement, but it is St. Patrick's Day, so we're wearing green to uphold the tradition. And of course, it's March 17th, Friday, March 17th, and you're live on Shally's Alley. Today, we have a special guest because all of our guests are special. And in this particular case, someone I've known for a while, actually, Marc Hamel. Marc is a principal sourcer, which if you know full stack and the world of engineering, you know what principal means. Principal is like the highest level of like rank. You got like, senior staff, and then you got principal. I think the only thing higher than principal might be like fellow or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
What is it?
Or like there's also distinguished. And
Distinguished. There you go.
it's something different every company,
So
but
it's
yeah.
a pretty senior thing. So he's pretty high up there in the ranks of all things sourcing. And he used to be at Meta as a technical sourcer. So I think he went full circle. Left Amazon, went to Meta, went back. But I think you've been a sourcer for what, 13, 14 years, something like that?
Roughly, yeah, that sounds about right. A long time, but not as long as other people in this room. But yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
All right. It looks like I have an API error. So let me see if I can correct that. Let's see. Streams, channels. Uh, huh. Okay. Looks like it's not connected on Twitter. So let me see if I can do that.
We're on LinkedIn. I can see that because Garrett chimed in.
You're on LinkedIn. Okay. All right. So we're on LinkedIn. We're on Twitter. We're on YouTube. But I think we somehow lost Facebook. Let's see if I can turn that back on.
It's because
Nope.
there's nobody there to operate it.
I can't do that. Oh, Facebook's not connected.
Maybe I left on bad terms.
They know you're here.
All I can
They
think
know you're
of.
here. No, it's probably just some weird thing. I'm just not going to worry about it. The recording is up there and it is on LinkedIn. So, yeah, me either. And then, of course, it is on YouTube. So, maybe I can figure out how to get that activated later. I think I can add a channel. So let's see if I can do Facebook Live. Profile group page. I'll do profile. Connect Facebook. Oh, this might work. Go back. Okay. It says it's added.
Huh.
It says it's added. So if I turn it off, what happens? Let's see if I turn it off and turn it back on. Sorry, guys. I thought this would be on Facebook, but apparently it's not. So let's see. The sourcing method back on. Unable to connect. Not sure why. All right. Well,
who knows?
That's all right. The show goes on. So, anyways, I was saying, Marc and I met. We met at SourceCon a long time ago, right? Were you at Amazon then, or was it even before that?
No, I'll give. Yeah, when I don't know what year that was, but no. Actually, I might have been at Amazon then. I don't recall. My journey, though, I fell into this kind of like pretty much everybody I've met. I'm beyond lucky to speak at like crazy places, source cons, and fun stuff all over the place. And I always like to ask the question of like, does anybody have a cool story of how they got into sourcing? Nobody really has that, and that's me. Like, I just fell into it. I had a buddy that called me up out of college and said, "You want to do this?" And I was like, "How much are they looking to pay? Cool, let's do it." Fell into it. I was agency, did a little bit of everything, then went to more.
Started in the agency way back when.
Way back when, yeah, way back when. Yeah.
How did you get into agency recruiting?
That's where my buddy called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to try this?" And
okay, so you had no idea. You're like, "What is this?"
Yeah, I was there for 6 years or something like that. It's all a blur. I did everything. Like, we had,
group.
Yeah.
With that. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And then, so how did you transition into sourcing as a dedicated job?
That when I went to, so at the agency, it was the full desk agency, and then I went to it was more of it's a smaller, like I think we had 7,000 people at the time, and we had like a 4-person TA team at this company. They did a lot of like board level component work and a lot of like hardware engineering and stuff like that. Point is, we had 4 people in the TA team, so I did a little bit of everything, but I really indexed heavily on the sourcing side. I just kind of fell into it. But being that it was like full desk, I did all of it, but really found my spot in sourcing, and had some friends that I knew that went to that small startup company called Amazon at the time, and called me up, went up there, interviewed. Next thing I know, moved to Seattle, and that was that. Worked there for I don't know, about 4 years, sounds right. And then went to the artist formerly known as Facebook, who apparently doesn't want me to be live streamed. And then after what, 2 years or so, close to, made the trip back there to Amazon. So that's where I am now. And I tell you that because, yeah, I've been in the journey in total, it's been a majority of sourcing, but there's been flavors of recruiting. And in my opinion, like those that are like strong sourcers have been, and I think this is the line that you used. The best sourcers I know are those that were a recruiter at one point and made the
Yeah.
conscious decision to be a
Yeah.
sourcer. And
Not
like a
sure
big
that's a
part of
line. I
my
think it's
role
more like a
here,
personal experience.
for sure, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And a big part of my role here is really demystifying like sourcing as a career path. Like we have just this stigma industry wide, but especially at Amazon, of like you go sourcer, like full life cycle. We call them client leads, which are more or less closers.
Hmm.
Recruiting manager, like that's just the linear path that you take as somebody in the TA field. And like my role is really about like, no, sourcing is a real function. Like we have like a job description for this. We have
Yeah.
like leveling guidelines for this. Like this is a real thing, and to keep people in that path. Is really a big part of our role. So yeah, that was kind of a tangent, but there you go.
No, I don't think so. Honestly, for a very long time, I struggled with. I spoke at all the ERE events for both coasts every year, and I struggled with proving to corporate America that this was a legitimate profession. Um, so it wasn't until not that long ago that it was really accepted as a job. When I first started doing this as like a singular job, so I was in staffing agency too, and that's when I started evolving sourcing for my own profit, right? But my first actual job where it was literally a sourcing job, where that was my job and there were recruiters and sourcers, was at the turn of the millennium in 1999 to 2000. Back then there were only like maybe 3 companies that had a what would be eventually called a dedicated sourcing team, and it was still very much like nobody even thought it was a profession. It wasn't about till 2015 that there was enough momentum where you could go do a LinkedIn search and find people that had the job title sourcer, and they were in the hundreds of thousands. Now it's, I think, 1.1 million people worldwide.
Wow.
So yeah, it's kind of one of those things like, wow, I can't believe I sort of started this. I
Yeah.
know I wasn't the first person to do internet sourcing, but I was amongst the top 10. And and we knew each other. It was like Barbara Ling, Glenn Gutmacher. Ayers hadn't even just the Ayers was barely just even getting they had a recruiter in a box program. John Sumsner had something like that. But then it just started evolving, and I just kept trying to push the limits. I created job descriptions, I created career paths, and all that stuff. And now it's a legitimate career, that it's accepted. You can look it up in the job titles and everything. Still has its problems with becoming, I would say, mainstream,
Yeah.
in that you can't go to like a salary calculator and put in sourcer. And there's still also the confusion with sourcing for procurement, which comes
Exactly.
up all the time. I get invited to all these like conferences for supply chain. I'm like, dude, wrong sourcing.
Yeah. All the time. And it's funny, we went like a couple years ago when I was with Amazon, went to a push of like, so my role when I was with Amazon the first time is I was kind of like a deployable resource. Like they would throw me into teams that had like aging recs or V1 startups and crazy stuff, and I'd help kind of build sourcing plans for the team and triage some of the issues they're running into it. And also I'd pick up a row and help source with them. But I say that because one of the crazy projects they threw me on was we needed to hire more recruiters and more sourcers. And they threw me in to like help with the team to do that and kind of lead the team through that journey. And when we started going after like, hey, when you start hiring some sourcers, a bunch of people did tons of searches and brought people that, like you just said about the procurement side. It's just like guys, like, no, this is what we do. Let's find the right people for this. Like, it was just a whole headache. And it's crazy though that you said like you kind of started that because sourcing is a function, because that's a real thing. And quick note, I will say, I'm, like I said earlier, I'm so lucky to be able to like speak at SourceCons and HRTX next week and stuff like that. And I've done it for a while, and I don't really get nervous like speaking at events. Like I enjoy it. Like there's
Really,
anxiety.
I still get nervous.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. There's like anxiety, but I think it's like masked with some of the like excitement of doing it. But I'm a little nervous for this, man. Like I don't usually get nervous, but I think it's because twofold. A, Uh, it's Shally. Like you think about the Mount Rushmore of
Oh, come
sourcing,
on.
the Mount
Yeah, really,
Sourcemore.
I'm intimidating. Come on.
No, 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 not intimidating. But you think about like Mount Sourcemore. There's like you.
Mount Sourcemore.
I just feel like that. You, probably Glenn Cathey, um,
Uh,
that man's the man. Like there's like a few folks out there, and so
Man,
like
you got me up there as a grandfather with a couple teenagers.
I guess you could think of it that way. Um, but also like we don't prep, so you just kind of like strap me into the rocket ship and
Absolutely. That's
launch me
why
to
that's
go.
why I'm on a jet engine here.
But I mentioned that because you're right. Like it's cool to think of like you started some of these things, and like these are things that we're still working on. Is like adopting sourcing as a function. Like
Yep.
it's going to take continued work. But anyway, I appreciate you
There's
mentioning
a
that.
good question from Garrick here. I'll put it up on the screen. I don't know if you can see. What are your thoughts on leadership that still sees sourcing as a junior recruiter function? Many people still see sourcing as entry level, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you answer. So think about that for a second. I'm gonna give you a little anecdote that recently happened. So I'm in my capacity professionally. I'm global head of, and that is essentially a senior director or junior vice president level job. There are many other people that are global heads of sourcing. That's so a job has arrived as a corporate function if you have someone that is a global head of or a vice president of, right? That's basically, you have a career path that goes from entry level all the way to that. And it goes to show you it's not entry level. But I got to tell you, I was on a call with a recruiter the other day demoing Gem, which is a CRM a tool. Some folks may know. And this seasoned, experienced recruiter with 5 years, a total of a whopping 5 years of recruiting, a seasoned recruiter was demoing Gem, and she said something that made me laugh out loud. She said, "Oh yeah, when I was at my previous job, I I used to allow the sourcers to use Gem." And I was just like, "Allow? You allow?" So basically, no, she said, "I used to allow my sourcers." So the sourcers belonged to her like some sort of object, right? And she gave them permission to use Gem. And I was just like, wow. So
Uh,
yeah, I think Garrick has a very good point. That's not just leadership. That's all over the place.
yeah.
Um, so now, what are your thoughts on that? Let me bring the question back up here.
Tons of thoughts. I'll keep it succinct, though. What I'll say first is that yeah, a big part of what I'm trying to do here within a very large company is demystify sourcing as a career path, and
Right.
it really comes from like our leadership, which I'm so lucky to roll up to an individual that is very invested in sourcing as a function. But it also, and another thing around sourcing is we as sourcers often become order takers. I've seen it so many times over again. Like we're in a meeting with a very senior manager on the business side that we're supporting their hiring for, and we kind of allow them to do that. Like we end up being order takers instead of being consultants and talking about what they're looking for and influencing without
Mhm.
authority through data. Like be the expert in the room when it comes to actually the market. And I think like that will help provide a platform to sourcers as opposed to being just order takers trying to get into the next step of their career where they can have more influence as a recruiter, trying to have more influence when they can become a manager. I think those things, just like a whole unit together, is what really is a big push. But
Yeah.
when you have a
And there's
manager
a
like
whole
that,
department with sourcing,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And when you have a manager, hence, like I think the questions around like a recruiting manager
Yep. Or
that
TA
sees
manager or
sourcing,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, that sees sourcing as like the entry level function. Like it's really about the education side. Like no, like we are experts in what we do, and we
That's
are
right.
like data experts. I mean, there's so many flavors that can make up a great sourcer.
That's another thing, by the way. Yeah, you raise a good point. So another way to measure the maturity of a job function, as I have been talking, I use this. You might not know this, but there's an organization called the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, and they collaborate with the ISO, which is the International Standards Organization. A lot of folks know ISO 9000, which is like the manufacturing gold standard and stuff like that. But there are ISO standards for a lot of different things, and the ISO is a global organization that produces these standards. So for many years, I sat with the ANSI organization on the ISO internationally with 37 countries, developing the standards for recruiting and the standards for talent acquisition and metrics and all that. If you're interested in looking this up, it is the TC 260. TC stands for for Technical Committee. So look up ISO TC 260. Let's see if I can put that in the chat here real quick. That would be ISO, International Standards Organization, TC/260. They produce all kinds of different standards in HR and in talent acquisition in general. But anyways, the reason I was telling you this is there was already, and when I joined the group, there was an already established model of the recruitment standard, which was was basic because it had developed, some years back. And when I joined, one of the projects was to reestablish it and add to it. So I was able to contribute to that. And then I wanted to contribute to creating a sourcing standard. And that's where I ran into this question at a very large scale. In some countries, because it's 37 countries, it was still considered a function of recruiting. And so the argument that I used to this body of representatives from every single country that participated, the argument that I used to prove that we were a separate function is the evolution of other professions. So take, for example, marketing. There used to be somebody that was in charge of marketing for the company. Now you have digital marketing, advertising, social marketing, social media marketing, different flavors. You have marketing support, marketing intelligence, business intelligence, etc. Another example would be law. You used to have a corporate attorney. Your company had an in-house counsel, right? General counsel. But now companies have privacy attorneys. Um, they have copyright attorneys, patent attorneys. They have trial attorneys. They have attorneys that negotiate. So you used to have an HR person, right? An HR generalist. And then you have HR business partners and talent acquisition and recruiting. You used to have a recruiter. Now you have recruiters and you have sourcers. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the evolution of and now sourcing is beginning to, over the last couple of years, evolve into its own specializations. You have sourcers that specialize on the research end of things. They generate data leads. They know how to do scraping. And this brings me to the topic we wanted to talk about today. And you have sources that do social media. You have sources that do conversion, where they're engaging people. They're writing content. So they're almost a cross between social media and sourcing. And so the role of the sourcer is itself becoming a specialization. And so this is what I wanted to talk to you about today is you're part of a group that represents themselves as sourcers who code. I'm also part of that group. Many years ago, I studied computer science. And so I actually, I wasn't a sourcer that code. I was a coder that sourced. Glenn Guttmacher, for example, is also part of that group. And he talks a lot about JavaScript. Tell me, tell everybody, not me, because I'm part of the group, but tell everybody about that group. Is there really do we have to learn how to code if we're sourcers? What's the real benefit to it?
Yeah, lots to unpack there, but quick answer. Sourcers Who Code is a group that, if you think about sourcing as a function, like you're typically doing a lot of like keyword searches and you're doing research, like you mentioned, and you're doing like the discovery, the engagement, those sorts of things. But if you're talking about the technical side, there's a lot of benefit in having the knowledge of the actual things that you're looking to source for. Like if you think about like a lot of us out there in the technical field source engineers to some facet, to be able to understand the basic nuances of what an engineer does on a daily basis and how they do it is
right.
very
Like almost like taking a course on IT. Like what does an IT what does the IT department do? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's where my curiosity sparked from is
Okay.
I wanted, like when I jumped into tech recruiting, I knew some basics and things like that, but I found a lot of value in at least like diving deeper into like understanding each layer of the technical stack and like why and the how and what do we use and what do they use. And then that just sparked more interest around like, wow, you can do some cool stuff with this. And then just dove into like learning the basics of things like, oh, somebody shared it, like Python. And then I took basic courses on that. And that led into more of like, wow, you can get to the point where you can manipulate things a little bit to your benefit. And then you dive into the rabbit hole of, wow, these are kind of shiny new tools, which we can talk about in a second. But your question though is around like sources who code, and it's the opportunity for
And is there really value in should all sourcers learn how to code basically?
And I don't think to learn how to code, no, I don't see that. You need, if that's something you're interested in, you need to think about the reason why and like what you're trying to get out of it. Are you trying to get out of it to understand more about the profiles you're looking at, or are you trying to get something out of it where you can build your own tools? And
Okay.
in today's world, I feel like there's enough out there that you don't need to learn to code, but there's a lot of benefit in understanding at least how to like look at it and understand what it's doing under the hood to an extent, which doesn't require you to have to pass or possess a comp sci degree. And that's kind of the level that I'm in. Like writing code is really like copying and pasting it in most cases. And I understand it to an extent to do that. If you ask me to sit down and write something from scratch, I could probably piece something together at least, but it'd take me much longer than it probably should.
Okay.
So that's kind of the extent of where I draw the line, but I can get by with manipulating, and like I can show an example of like something Andre Bradshaw created, and I just added a couple lines into it to make it easier for me and that sort of stuff. So Sources of Code provides a platform for individuals that want to learn, but also want access to some cool things that have been created and just have a great discussion about the benefits of learning various frameworks and how to code and stuff like that. I think it's a real good Facebook group for discussion, but also just curiosity. So
Okay. So basically, you've got two things. You've got people that are essentially learning about the people they recruit. So if you recruit developers, programmers, software engineers, then sourcers who code, or learning as a sourcer, whether you join a group or not, or just go to, sometimes people ask me, hey, Shally, do you recommend any IT courses, or, should I learn Python and things like that? So one point that you make is, yes, if you seek to understand your target audience, and your target audience is developers, yes, learning to code or just the basic JavaScript and Python, which is pretty easy to learn, is a good idea. And then the other side, right? So, A, your audience, and B, if you are interested in making something, an app or something, with what a lot of times is referred today as low code,
mhm,
then learning some basic JavaScript, which is very close to HTML, very close to English, would allow you to make things like what Glenn Guttmacher does, which are bookmark scripts or bookmarklets that allow you to do things with your page that you want to do based on, the workflow that you have,
yeah,
your own workflow. So creating apps used to be you need to learn how to program, but nowadays you can program essentially with these basic languages,
mhm.
like JavaScript. So I get that. So that's two reasons. But what about Chat GPT and models like that? And laugh if you want to, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because I actually have developed a pretty nasty habit of asking Chat GPT to write code for me, because it takes. And I'm just gonna, I'll admit, I learned programming in college. It takes longer for me to type out the things that I want to type out, and check it to make sure it's correct, than it does for me to explain it by talking at a computer. With ChatGPT, you can speak to it.
Yeah.
So you can talk to it and you can say, hey, make me a script on Python that grabs the stuff from this page, uses this, blah, blah, blah. And then it does it. I actually know what the code does, but it would take me longer to write it. And the other thing that I'm using it a lot for lately is Google
100%.
Sheets and Excel spreadsheets. I go there and I say, write me a
Yeah.
formula that extracts that removes the rightmost five characters, and replaces this with that on that cell, and then it comes back and, like, gives it to me, and I'm like, that's a lot easier than me trying to troubleshoot it. I would spend hours sometimes correcting formulas and swapping them out. So do we almost like need to learn code just so that we can talk to Chat GPT? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I first off, you said a bad habit of
Because
having
I'm not doing it
ChatGPT write the code.
myself.
I don't think it's a
It's
bad
like
habit at all. That's a
it's like a
fantastic habit.
calculator, right?
Like
I feel like I'm cheating.
that's the analogy that I use is I say it's like a calculator on a math test. Like we had to like long division and handwrite this out, and then we could use the calculator on the math test, and we could get the. It's just like why not use this? And to the point, like you just said, like I think it's very valuable to understand
So you can
what it's
read,
doing
yeah,
under the hood. Like when
yeah.
it gives you not under the hood, that's a bad analogy, but when it spits it out to understand why. But think of how long, like you said, it would have taken you to write each line, or to even then you'd have to run it through an IDE. You'd have to go
Mhm.
through all the different steps to make sure it
Yep.
actually executes properly. Where not to say every time it does, but the reason why I feel like it's beneficial to your point of ChatGPT does a great job, but there's often times that it will spit out code that still doesn't like there's something that gets hung up
Right.
to understand
You
what's
got to
getting hung up.
correct
I
it.
think of it the same way that we do with like Boolean strings. Like I can sit there and write a long Boolean string, or I could use a Boolean builder for me, and then it would spit out the string for me. And then if I needed to manipulate it, or if something wasn't returning results, I would know what was wrong in it and fix it. So I don't think it's a bad habit. I do it all the time. Uh, I think the best thing about ChatGPT is like it's great doing that stuff and writing code, or even like triaging and finding out where errors might be.
Hmm.
But it's like an on-demand Stack Overflow. Like how often do you, like I said, coding, in my opinion, is a lot of copying and pasting.
Hmm.
How often do you get to a point where you're trying to research something, or you're trying to find what this line means, and then you have to go to
Right.
Stack Overflow, then you have to
Go
pare
look
down
it
to
up and read and
this is
right.
popping in ChatGPT, boom, and like think how much time you have back in the day.
And
Like,
it's a time saver. Yeah. In
yeah,
fact, ChatGPT will actually explain how the formula works, right? So like just using the example of write a formula that trims the rightmost 5 characters from a cell. It comes back and it goes, okay, here's your formula, and then here's how it works. It's like, okay, the len function does this, and
yep,
then the left function does that, and so you're learning as you go. It's almost like a
exactly.
self-teaching tool when you use it that way. So I think the argument of pro learning how to code or learning to understand code or read code is is a solid argument. In other words, if it's your audience, you should, and if you have any interest in automating things, even basic things like Excel, then you should because it'll be easier to do it even if you're using a robot. And this other thing that just came out that actually came out yesterday is Microsoft. Shoot, I forgot what it's called. Microsoft
Yeah, Word and
Command Copilot.
Copilot. Yeah,
Microsoft Copilot. I read
yeah,
about this yesterday. It's going to be inside of, and it's not just ChatGPT. It's a whole bunch of other things. It'll be inside of Word and Excel and PowerPoint doing exactly this. So you'll be able to, in your PowerPoint document, use the command pilot and type in, give me ideas for how to say this or summarize this, and it'll make it so that you can make presentations faster. It's not replacing you. You still have to, talk to it, but it's Clippy. It's Clippy reborn into a chat bot that actually answers questions.
it's Clippy 2.0. You just said the line that is like the perfect line when I think of ChatGPT is you said when you go into PowerPoint and you say, give me ideas for, like you can, the things that it does, like it's math, like it's text, it's basic things that you could find out there to an extent, but it's like
Right.
I use it as an idea starter. Like I feel like I sometimes can get good ideas. Most of the times, like give me ideas for this, and then I can
Mhm.
branch off from there. Like that's the area that I feel like we can really use a lot of benefit. It's just like getting something started. ChatGPT does a great job of that.
Yep.
I just wanted to highlight that because you mentioned it. I totally agree.
It's a language model, right? So that's
Mhm.
really where it behaves the
Yep.
best. So give me another example of code.
Yeah.
Not ChatGPT, but another example of code that you've used or
Yeah.
type of practical, something practical that people can go, oh, okay, I see that
Yeah.
as a good motivation to learn how to code.
Great question. And that is that's the other, like as you mentioned, the reasons to ask yourself, like if you're trying to build something, why? And it's very easy, and we were talking about this offline before we jumped on and you used the way back when I was doing a chat, I was doing a presentation for HRTX, and they offered up, hey, you could run it by Shally for his feedback first. So sweet, let's do that. And I was talking about different tools, and you're like, make sure you don't like come across as the one who follows the shiny
Right,
new
shiny
toy.
object syndrome.
And I was like,
Right.
that's a really good point. And I mentioned that because it's very easy to do that when you
Yeah.
discover what's out there, as well as when you have the ability to manipulate things for your use of what you need it for, to find them as like shiny new toys. And
Right. And then all of a
you
sudden
need
you're
to
just
like,
playing with the toy and not really
yeah,
doing
and you
anything.
can sit there for hours and be like, wow, this is so cool. Like now I got this cool list. And then you never go back to it. Like that was cool, but now I'm never actually going to use this again. So that's what I usually look at the lens through when I like find something. Exhibit A, and one of the tools that I used and used it today, even before we hopped on the call, Andre Bradshaw, who's if you don't know Andre Bradshaw, go to his GitHub. He has tremendous tools on there, very easy to use. Very bright individual, actually works for a small company called Amazon now. He wrote a script, and here's like the example of what I'm talking about when like my knowledge versus
Mm.
copying and pasting. He wrote a pretty not simplistic, but not really complicated JavaScript where it scrapes Hopin. So Hopin is the app like HRTX
Hmm.
uses for their events, and it scrapes all
Right.
the people that have registered or the attendees or various different things. He wrote that. It's helpful because there's lots of conferences out there that use
Have
Hopin.
lists. Yeah.
Yeah, and you get the list very quickly.
Yeah. And
But
to explain for those that may not know what scraping means, you can do this yourself. You can do it manually, but essentially it is taking all the information that is on the page or behind the code of the page that's visible to the computer, it may not be visible to you in the UI, and parsing it, grabbing it and essentially copying it and pasting it into a more legible format, like a table, like a spreadsheet. So that's what scraping means.
yeah,
Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
Thank you. No. I'm glad you cleared it. Thank you. So for this, you have to open up your Dev Tools in Chrome. You have to paste it in. You have to paste in your authentication token. You have to
Right.
paste in the event. Blah blah blah, and it works if you know what you're doing. But like to the extent of, it's very simplistic to have add line where it adds a prompt. And so when you
Hmm.
push enter on the code, it pops up on your screen, say insert the event ID or things like that, which makes it
Right.
easier as to have to go and like rewrite the code or open
So you
in
don't
C++.
have to write the code, you just put it into the prompt.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's the extent of like where I find benefit in knowing how these things work under the hood, but also having the ability to like check. There we go. Having the ability to do a little bit of editing. So for me, like I took that, I added in those few lines of prompts, and then I reused or reran it through as a bookmarklet. So instead of having
Yep.
to paste it into the dev tool or the console, you can just run the bookmarklet. And when you run it, it pops up, says put in the event ID. And then after you click enter, it says put in your authentication token. You put that in and there's your list. So like those are real things that I really use, because if I wanted to go through and write that or copy everybody's name or you could probably use webscraper.io. You could probably even use something like instant data.
Instant data scraper, yeah.
You could do
Yep.
these things, right? But instead of just running this live script, I'll scrape them all for you, put it in a CSV.
Hmm.
Here's the list of the 300 people that attended, Women Who Code event last April or something like that. Those are very beneficial because those are the warmest of warm reach outs when you reach out to somebody and want to talk to them about the
Yeah, I
conference.
saw you at a conference. Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
So that's a great use case. Another tool, like there's GitHub has tons of open source tools that you could fall down a rabbit hole for, but like there's Chat Downloader. So Chat Downloader is one where it downloads all the conversation that took place during a YouTube video, live or not. There's tools that can do that. But Chat Downloader is cool because it has Vimeo. You can also do Zoom. You can do Crowdcast.
Hmm.
So those things are helpful too when you think about what are you getting out of it, where you're getting a list of the people that are very interested in the topic being presented.
The names of the people that were
Yeah.
participating,
So
right?
that's the
Yep.
extent. Like that's, I think, what's really beneficial. But to the point of like learning some of the basics, if you can take something like Andre's amazing work and add in a few prompts to make it easier for you, there you go. So
Yeah,
that's kind of like the super quick example I wanted to share when
that's
we talk
great.
about.
I think I'll add to that by saying that if you want to determine whether or not you should invest in learning, and by the way, learning how to code is not a huge, it's not a 5 hour, I'm sorry, it's not a 5 year degree. Some people do have 5 years degree in computer science, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about you know reading a book and taking
Udemy
a
courses.
online class, right? Exactly. But if you want to determine whether or not it's worth it for you, um, here's two measuring sticks that you could use. The first one is the concept of write once, use often. So is whatever this is something that you're going to repetitively use? Anything that you do repetitively, which can be defined in a lot of ways, once a day is repetitive, once a month is repetitive, once a year, probably not. But if it's something that you're going to do with some frequency, it is worth spending some time on writing an app or a script or something that helps you do it, because if it takes you 10 minutes and you do it 10 times a day and you do it every day of the week, this adds up to hours where you could have just spent 1 hour developing something, creating something that then makes your 10 minutes be more like 10 seconds. So, are you going to use it often? Is the one of the two questions that I would ask. And the other question that I would ask is there intrinsic value in doing this with a machine that that exceeds the value of doing it as a person? So, for example, um, you could give a robot the entire Great Gatsby and say summarize this in a sentence. But is that really something that you should do? Yes, it'll summarize it for you in a sentence. But maybe you should also think about reading The Great Gatsby, because there's so much more that you can extract from that, right? So when it comes to scraping code, or I'm sorry, scraping websites, yes, there may be value in creating an app that does it for you, but what could you have learned from the structure of that website if you just knew a little bit about how the code works? In other words, you can go out, you can get a tool or buy a tool or make a tool that scrapes it, but what if you knew just the basics? And and I'll add to that. I'll say that learning something like Python is really not very difficult. Most of these modern fourth generation languages are very much English based, and they follow the same logic the language does. To those of you that are uninitiated in programming, the basic rule of all programming is very simple. If this, then that. If this happens, trigger variable, then do this activity, whatever that is, right? If the keyboard, if the key K is typed, then print K on screen. That's basic, if this then that. So knowing that, then it's just a matter of learning kind of the commands of Python, and I would say probably Python's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's
Do you have any other
conversational.
that you would recommend?
It's by far I highly recommend. Yeah, if you want to get into it, Python, softest barrier to entry by far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and HTML5, I think. Just because a lot of times when you go into like a view source, you can right click and view source, and you see the source of the page in HTML. A lot of times there's class or keys or other things structurally that will tell you things about the website that you could then use to scrape and automate, that are beneficial if you know what they are, so you know how to put them into something like a scraper, for example. So
Very well put. I totally agree.
so
Especially
you said something about bright shiny object syndrome before. Has that Have you had an experience where you basically chase the bright shiny object a little bit too far?
oh yeah. I mean, I like to think now that I think of it through the lens of like your
Yeah,
example was perfect. Like, actually, what was the word you used? It said, "Build once,
use
use
often.
repeatedly." Yeah,
Yeah,
that's in other words, a lot less dumbed down words. Public education here. I think of it through those lens, but it's very easy to follow those. Like you think about OSINT tools,
hmm
and I mean, there's a fine line between what is something we're actually going to use and like what's cool to do. Uh,
right,
and then
exactly.
you find yourself using some of those in your spare time because like, oh, I got to learn how to do this. I got to learn how to, find all the usernames from every different profile this person has in mass quantity. And then at the end of the
But is
day,
it practical? Did you maybe just need one profile?
yeah, right. Did I need to know their GitHub so I can see all the different projects and repositories I'm a part
Mhm.
of? Yes. Is it cool that I got access to their bodybuilding.com website? Like, why do you need that? But it's cool that you can have it. And I feel like there's a lot of those tools out there, and it's very easy to be like, wow, I know everything I need to know to reach out to this person and have an educated conversation, when I could have just looked at, the code that they've written and talked to them that way. So yes, the answer is 100% yes. But you need to just like ground yourself with like, what do I actually need to know? Like, what's going to come up in
What
a
I really need
conversation?
to know,
Like,
yeah.
what's the best way
What's
to tie
fun
this?
versus you also
Yeah,
want to learn just for fun. Some people like to, just learn to learn and read to
yeah,
read.
yeah,
But from a point of view of professionally, there's fun, and then there's fun, and there's education, right? And then there's the practicality of it. So
yeah.
that's why I recommend those two measures. There's a ton of stuff on OSINT on my start page if you want to check it out,
That
for
is
folks
my
that are
bookmarked first page for just about anything.
yeah, it's a
It's a
ton of stuff in
tremendous
there.
start me page.
And as I work on it, I continue to label things so they get a little bit more organized. I actually ended up paying for the subscription because you get more features, like it detects bad links and things like that. So
Oh, I didn't know.
free advertising for Start Me. So I wanted to wrap up today. I appreciate you coming here. I have all my guests. I throw them this curveball at the end. I wanted to ask you to leave the audience with something that you want them to think about over the weekend. This could be about what we talked about something else, just something, words of wisdom or deep thoughts, or even just inspiration, whatever comes to mind right now that you think is important for the audience
Yeah.
to walk away and think about.
Well, I mentioned in the beginning of this when I said I was like a little nervous because I'm an over prepare and we don't prepare. So you caught me on this one. I'm not nervous to answer it. What I will say, and I truly mean this, is that the conversation doesn't stop at the end of like this video, this recording, all that kind of stuff. Like for
Mm-hmm.
me and myself, when I got into sourcing in the agency world, it was one thing, but then you kind of shifted in myself into more the corporate environment than with a company like Amazon, where I had to totally reinvent myself. Like I went there with knowledge of how to use LinkedIn, and I thought I could get by with it because I had success. The company had what, like 6 figures, or probably 5 figures worth of sourcers and recruiters, all using LinkedIn. So I went in there and was just blown away.
Fishing in the
I
same pond,
reinvented,
everybody else, right?
yeah, and I reinvented myself by diving into communities like SourceCon or watching webinars from the great people in
Mm-hmm.
our community that are so generous with building Start Me pages and things of that nature. And that's where I really like reinvented myself. As I was hungry, I was curious. And the biggest thing and the most beneficial thing to me was I would watch these or listen to these, and everybody was so open and welcoming. I would reach out to them like, hey, I noticed you did this. Like, does this work in this way? Or I have a question about this. And everybody was willing to help out. So that's why I say like words of wisdom or just like thoughts, or like it doesn't stop here.
Mm-hmm.
Like if Shally mentioned something, I'm sure he'll probably respond to you if you have a question for him. Or if I mentioned something in my crazy blabbering that was actually beneficial, reach out to me. Like get me on LinkedIn. I'm a recruiter. I'm on LinkedIn. Or send me a message or email or whatever you need. Like be curious. The conversation doesn't stop here. That's my soapbox.
So yeah, that's really good. Reach out, right? Don't assume that somebody's too busy to help you or whatever. Just ask, right? No, I
Yep.
think that's really good advice. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for coming. I know you have a hard stop. Hopefully we can do this again.
Absolutely.
And yeah, if everybody has any questions, you can reach out to Marc. I put Marc's link in there earlier. I'll drop it on one more time here. There it is. Oops, sorry, I got your name wrong. I'm sorry about that.
It's actually, my name's actually Markham, Marquam. So the C is just arbitrary. Like I threw a C in there when I was younger because I wanted to be different, but I
So
get
it
K.
could be. I could have gotten it right. Are you trying to say I could have gotten it right?
It technically was like, yeah. So Mark,
Okay.
America, 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 whatever you want to call me.
But the LinkedIn URL was correct. So if you want to
Perfect.
connect with him, reach out to him. And obviously, you guys know where I am. Once again, thank you. And everybody, happy St. Patrick's Day. Celebrate and stay safe and be kind to each other. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye
Shally.
bye.